Okay, welcome back. Time for our third session, the impact of sport on the environment. There's another panel discussion coming up after we hear from Dr. Russell Seymour. Please give Russell a very warm welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Great, thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today. So we're talking about the impact of sport on the environment. As said, my name's Russell Seymour. I am a senior fellow at Loughborough University in London in the Institute of Sport Business. I'm also the founder and chair of an organisation called BASIS, the British Association for Sustainable Sport. And that came about, I was the first sustainability manager at a UK sports venue at Lord's Cricket Ground back in 2007, 2008. I've been told I was the first in the world. I don't know if that's true, but certainly the first in the UK as a full-time sustainability manager in a sports venue. So we're going to talk about impact of sports on the environment. But first of all, we need to know where we are now. If you compact the history of the Earth, the planet Earth, into the period of a football match, human beings and human civilization would have appeared just as the referee is putting the whistle to his lips. In the last second of that match. That's how long human beings have been on this planet. This is Gianni Sakizwe, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and he's going to come up a wee bit later as well. But we just appeared in the last second of the match. And yet, in that time, we've caused a huge amount of damage to the planet. In that time, carbon dioxide concentration has gone up. I use this slide, it's a little bit old, you can see it says 2013. This is the point where we passed 400 parts per million. The safe limit that scientists think is safe is 350. We passed that in the late 1980s. And in fact, just a few days ago, I tried to get the most up-to-date number. 29th of April 2023, that's the highest ever recorded carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. 1 year ago, it was lower. We've gone up by 1% just in 1 year. Don't try and work out when I was born from that, but in my lifetime, it's gone up by about 20%. It's increasing rapidly. All this time, the temperature is increasing. Show the Stripes website. On the left, we're going back to 1884. To the right, we're coming up to contemporary times. This is for the UK. The deeper and darker the red, the warmer that average for the year. The deeper and darker the blue, the colder. It's fairly clear what the pattern is. It's even more evident if you do it as a bar chart globally. Temperatures are increasing. It's driven by carbon dioxide. It's driven by human activity. There is no doubt. Also in that time, the weight, the mass of stuff that we've built, the buildings, the cars, the electronics equipment, clothing, everything that we've manufactured outweighs all of the nature, all natural systems. We dominate the world that much. 1992, a group of scientists published a paper called A Warning to the World. They reviewed all sorts of issues. 25 years later, a group of scientists wanted to look at that and quantify what they were predicting. Those of you in the room that are old enough remember back in the 80s, the big issue was the ozone depletion, the ozone hole. Politicians got together and we made a change, and we've reduced ozone depleting chemicals, and this is a positive. We'll give that a green box around the graph. So the graph has 1992, because that's the point of where the first paper was written, and we go up to about 2016, 2017 with the data. That's a positive. Freshwater resources per capita is reducing, partly because our population is increasing, but also because we're genuinely losing freshwater resources. That's a negative. The amount that we can get out of the oceans in terms of our food, and remember millions of people, billions of people rely on the oceans for their protein, that's decreasing. The number of dead zones, and this literally means areas of the oceans, mainly on our coastal areas, literally there is no life whatsoever. The number of reported dead zones is increasing. Forests are being, with deforesting at a rapid rate. We've lost, in the last 50 years, 70% of all vertebrate animals. Mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians. So not number of species, this isn't species extinction, but literally the number of animals has decreased by 70%. All this time carbon emissions are going up. Temperature is rising, human population and the populations of animals that we farm are increasing. If you take all of the animals, all of the mammals, so human beings, we're mammals, our livestock, but all of the wild mammals, everything from mice and shrews up to elephants and giraffes and even whales and dolphins, 96% of the mass is human beings and the animals that we eat. That is how dominant human beings are on the planet. There was another warning, just 2 years later, 2019, a warning of a climate emergency. Now, don't try and look at the detail of the next slide. Lots of graphs. The set of graphs on the left, human impact, what we're doing. Remember, red is bad, green is good. There are a few things that we're doing, we're going the right direction, but so far, really, we're going the wrong direction. On the right are the climate impacts and the response of the climate and the natural environment. Every single one is going the wrong way. Every indicator that we're looking at is going the wrong way. In sport specifically, the academic literature, I've just returned to being an academic after many years of not being an academic, so I'm getting back around this. A couple of years ago myself, Dr. Maddie Orr from Loughborough University, Dr. Yuhei Inui from Manchester Metropolitan, and Greg Dingle at La Trobe University in Melbourne, we surveyed the literature. We looked at 2,000 papers, only 26 were relevant, and most of them have just been published in the last few years, looking directly at climate change impacts on sport. So the academic literature isn't really there specifically for sport, but it's starting to build. We have a tendency to just look at carbon issues, and we can't do that. There are all sorts of other issues that are impacting sport, impacting society in general. This isn't just a sport issue, it's a societal issue, but we've got the focus on sport today. There is so much information around climate change and climate issues impacts. There's also a huge review of biodiversity literature. So we've got a climate crisis, we've got a biodiversity crisis, we've also got a waste crisis. And sport contributes significantly to waste as well in terms of our operations at our major events. And that has an impact on biodiversity, has knock-on effects to climate, etc. These three things are intertwined and are linked together. So what about the impacts of the environment on sport? Turning the question around slightly. I'm going to go through a whistle-stop of a lot of examples of how the environment is changing and is impacting sport. Now, a lot of these things happened in the past. We've had extreme temperatures in the past. We've had big storms in the past. The point is that they're increasing in frequency and they're increasing in terms of their impact. So what is actually happening from a sport perspective? South Africa, 2017, such a bad drought that all cricket below professional level in Cape Town province, the area around Cape Town, was stopped. It was just too dangerous to play. It was like playing on concrete. The ground was so hard. So massive impact on sport. Indian Premier League, the richest cricket league in the world, again because of a drought. In one season, 2016, clubs were watering their pitches with millions of litres of water. Meanwhile, there was a drought going on where people were literally dying. Crops were failing, people were dying. In the middle of a season, 3 clubs were taken to court and they were told you can no longer irrigate your pitches. If you can't irrigate a cricket pitch, you can't play. So mid-season, they had to move their matches. Imagine if there's some kind of environmental impact that hit the northwest of England and Liverpool, Everton, Man United, Man City were told, you've got to move in the middle of the season. The impact on the fans, the impact on the infrastructure, the impacts on the clubs would be huge. That's what happened to the Indian Premier League in 2016. Wrong type of racing at a horse racing course. Floods are increasing. So, and just down the road is Worcestershire County Cricket Club that regularly floods as well. This is Corbridge Cricket Club, so this is recreational cricket. Storm Desmond came through, and their brand new pavilion that cost them a significant amount of money. It's something like £750,000 they spent on that. This is a village cricket club. So the England and Wales Cricket Board bailed them out. I think the ECB now has something like £4 million to help out local clubs because of weather impacts. On a bigger scale, on the left there, you've got 3 Category 5 hurricanes coming through. This is September 2018. The West Indies is under there, a big cricket-playing nation. Hurricane Maria then came through, a 4th one, the one on the right. It hit Dominica, flattened it. At the top left there, you can see Windsor Park, and it was decimated by a hurricane coming through. So damage to infrastructure damage to places that we play. Super Typhoon Hagibis came through during the Rugby World Cup in 2019. 3 matches were cancelled, and there were going to be some legal implications to that, because they didn't have a time within the schedule to actually reschedule any of those matches. So impacts on a World Cup and the structure and playing of that World Cup. There should have been bikes coming through here, because this was the penultimate stage of the Tour de France a couple of years ago. A massive storm came through and knocked out a lot of that infrastructure. 5th oldest golf course in the world, Montrose in Scotland, being knocked out by coastal erosion. The fairway used to be down where that line of rocks is. So storms, coastal erosion causing problems for golf clubs as well. England captain Joe, sorry, there are a few more examples coming as well. England captain Joe Root, 2018 in January, the hottest day for about 40 or 50 years in Sydney. Outside the ground, it's 47 degrees centigrade. Joe Root batted for 6 hours wearing full cricket kit. They took a thermometer into the middle at lunchtime. The temperature in the middle of that cricket ground was 57.6 degrees centigrade. 57.6. And he batted for 6 hours. This was in the video that you saw before. Tokyo Olympics, Paula Badosa, the Portuguese player, collapsed and was taken off in a wheelchair because of the heat, because of the humidity building up. Daniil Medvedev, similarly, was in the video. It just felt like he had full body cramps because of the heat, humidity. The umpire asked him if he felt he could carry on. That's what he said. So there's pressures on the players to play, but imagine the pressure on the umpire now, that responsibility. What could he actually do? So impacts on the officials as well. This is the Rose Classic in 2020 at Sunningdale in Surrey. Cancelled because of a wildfire. Wildfires in suburban Surrey in the home counties. And we just saw the Beijing Olympics completely on artificial snow. So the impacts of that, you add chemicals into that snow to make it artificially. But there were just lines of white within an otherwise completely snowless mountain. In fact, one day it did snow very slightly, and they had to clear the natural snow away because it meant that you couldn't actually snow on the artificial snow, which seems crazy. And it was mentioned in the write-up for this that some of the Winter Olympic venues will no longer be suitable in the future to hold any of these kind of events. So different scenarios, different years, but if it's in red, you can't do it. If it's in orange, it's going to be unreliable. And this is work by Dan Scott at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And just last November, the IOC deferred the decision on where the 2030 Winter Olympic Games would be held, citing climate issues because they couldn't be sure. So the IOC are thinking about how and where they actually schedule games. India against Sri Lanka a few years back, the air quality was so bad, players were leaving the field. Sri Lanka could only field 9 players because of air quality. Fast bowlers could only bowl 2 overs before they went to the side to have oxygen. There's oxygen up in the dressing rooms as well. Players suspended 4 times during one day of that match. And it isn't just the players. The hottest day ever recorded in England was last year. Before that, it was in July 2019, and it was my last test match working at Lord's. England played Ireland. First time Ireland had ever played at Lord's. But one of the hottest days, it was 38.9, I think it was. It wasn't that hot at Lord's. It was pretty close. It was the hottest day I'd ever experienced. The point here is, look at those open stands. More than double the normal number of people went for treatment of first aid. We had 182 medical referrals. So not just sit down for a few minutes, it's you need to go to a hospital because of heat impacts. So duty of care to spectators as well. Back to Gianni. He was officiating, I think it was in the African Cup of Nations, he was officiating a match. He finished it early, twice. Not just once, twice. After the match, he said he had somebody shouting in his ear, telling him to stop the game. It's time. But at about 80, I think it was 85th minute, he blew the whistle, said that's it. It was 1-0 at the time, the game was difficult, it could have gone either way. But he was suffering heat stroke, and he was hallucinating because of heat stroke. So this has impacts on officials as well, and there's good evidence to say that the number of errors being made by officials actually increases with increasing heat. So there's potential for errors from officials as well. It's not just the players and the quality of play that might change. And this might happen more frequently with climate change. But we're flipping this back over because we're also looking at the impact of sport on the environment, because this is two-way. There's a two-way relationship here. So we just saw Mr. Infantino saying how FIFA absolutely definitely had a carbon-neutral World Cup. This has generally been discredited, certainly by academics looking at it. They calculated an impact of the World Cup of around 3.6 million tonnes of carbon. It's estimated that it's at least 3 times that. And this is academics saying this, have reviewed this carbon footprint. They think it's probably at least 10 times that, because some of the assumptions just don't add up. And in fact, the assumptions around the carbon footprint, it's things around, they assume that all the fans coming in had one-way tickets. All of those fans flew back out, but maybe then they're saying, we're not responsible for that. They're only coming to watch our matches. It's up to them how they get back. So, you know, there's all sorts of assumptions. They made an assumption that a large proportion of people would stay with friends in Qatar. Sorry, you know, it's like, so no impact for hotels. As it turned out, there weren't enough hotel rooms. A lot of people were being ferried in and out from other countries to watch matches and flying back out again after the match. So it just didn't add up. So the point on that is we've got to be honest about what our actual impacts of sport are. But do we know what the impacts of sport actually is? No, we don't. Honestly, we have no idea. First thing you've got to do is define sport. What are we talking about? We're only talking about elite sport. We're only talking about the top matches. But then are we only talking about the top leagues in every country, or are we also including recreational sport in there? Are we talking about the family with 2 or 3 kids, one of whom plays football, somebody else plays netball, somebody else plays rugby, and parents are just driving around constantly, taking kids to different places, different sports events, gymnastics and swimming and whatever else it might be? There's a few nods in the audience. So what are we actually talking about when we're talking about the impacts of sport? That's the first thing we've got to think about. I'm going to just give a couple of guesstimates that have been made around sport. So this report by the Rapid Transition Alliance, Playing Against the Clock, written by David Goldblatt a few years ago, all sorts of interesting points in here. But the best estimate from kind of adding up these numbers that come out from the World Cup, from the Olympics, from major events, from doing some real back-of-the-envelope calculations for major leagues around the world, they came up with an operational carbon footprint around 30 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. That doesn't include broadcasting, it doesn't include kit manufacture, it doesn't include construction of the venues, doesn't include any of that. This is purely a best guess at the operational impacts of sport. And it, like I say, doesn't include amateur, grassroots, or recreational sport in there. The true carbon footprint could be 10 to 12 times higher. And that's just based on the idea of the financial value of sport and comparing that to global GDP. It's about 0.6% of global GDP, so take 0.6% of the carbon emissions. Now, look, you've got some really big emitters in there: steel manufacture, oil and gas exploration. Sport is nowhere near those kind of things. But just as another sort of best guess, take 0.6% of the global emissions as well, would put us up around 300 to 360 million tonnes. So, to narrow this down, between 30 million and 300 million. So a whole order of magnitude variation. It's fairly significant. It's a fairly significant impact. The point being, though, the influence of sport is enormous. And this is why I think, certainly, sport ought to be taking action around some of these issues, because we can put these ideas to the general public and maybe change behaviours. Use sport in a responsible way to change behaviours. That was focusing on carbon. So again, while I was working at Lord's, we looked at our waste. And over the course of 2 years, we really looked into our catering operations. We removed, per annum, 2 million pieces of single-use plastic. 2 million pieces of plastic that we were giving out to customers. We're still giving out 1 million pieces of plastic. When we worked out, we were giving out over 3 million pieces of plastic every year. We took out 2 million of them. This is just one venue, in one sport, in one country. Our operations now, and this goes across takeaway restaurants, theatres, cinemas, we do things in an easy way. So everything is throwaway, it's single use. It's an enormous potential impact that we could actually be changing. So I put on there, reuse ought to be normal behaviour. And even mass participation events, marathons, etc., there's often a lot of plastic being left now. Something like London Marathon, a lot of the big ones are trying to do lots of work around this, trying to make changes. We use lots of pesticides, we use lots of chemicals, we use fertilizers, nowhere near as much as agriculture. But we are using these chemicals to make these lovely greens, courses, pitches, whatever it might be. But we use a lot of chemicals on our grass. A lot of travel as well, whether it's a recent story around Premier League flights, lots of elite sports teams fly a lot, or whether it's sort of general travel and the emissions that are produced from our cars, not just our exhaust pipes, but tyre wear, brake pad wear, produce all these small particulate matter that gets into the lungs, causes asthma, causes all sorts of problems. Sport is also a nexus of so many other sectors. So sport is rarely looked at just by itself as a sector, but we bring together all sorts of other things. So hospitality and food and drink, that brings in agriculture, that brings in production, it brings in transport, brings in waste. Travel and transport of our staff, of our athletes, of our fans. Waste management and cleaning. Manufacture, so kit, equipment, replica shirts, merchandise. I should have also put on here construction of the venues. All of these things come together to deliver sport, so sport has a massive opportunity to push out down the supply chain as well. So we can influence food and agriculture. We can offer plant-based and reduced meat diets, seasonal or local. We can influence our suppliers to reduce the amount of pesticides that are being used on the food produced and talk about it. Travel, transport, make sure our fans know how to get to venues without using cars, on public transport. Policies around staff travel, player travel, how we get our goods and services brought into venues. Reduce, reuse, recycle. We all know that mantra. How many of us actually do it? It's actually a requirement under the waste regulations 2011 that we have some kind of waste management program. Very few sports venues actually have a detailed waste management program. And any waste food, make sure we redistribute it. We hear so much at the moment about food banks. There's a huge amount of food. One day at Lord's, we finished the match early. We'd already brought the food in. We fed 800 people the next day just by donating that food. But the biggest thing we can influence is attitudes. Sport is impacted by these issues, whether it's individual players, clubs, infrastructure, fans, umpires, referees, etc. There's all those examples I gave. But sport is impacted by these issues, so we can talk about them. We should be able to talk about them, but we have to adapt and we have to mitigate as well. So this is relevant to us, and sport has to talk about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russell. Russell, thank you very much indeed. I can now also introduce our other panel members. Would you please give Sara and Carlin a very warm welcome as they take their seats. Thank you very much. Thank you. Russell, terrific. Absolutely fantastic presentation. And given the fact I went to Qatar and went to Stadium 978, was it called? 678, the one on containers?
Oh, yeah.
It brought back memories. Do we need to applaud FIFA and applaud Qatar for the way that they got fans in and around the stadiums, though? It was quite a novel experience, having covered 3 previous World Cups.
I think so. I mean, look, the good thing about it was that it was in one city. So while you were there, the movement around, of course, it was relatively easy. They put in good public transport systems, all those kind of things. But does one city actually need 7 football stadiums? If you look further beyond it, this is for a period of 6 weeks maximum. So all that construction that's put in, you've mentioned the one that is demountable. To my knowledge, it's not been demounted and reused anywhere yet. The potential is there, but I don't think anybody's actually kind of booked it in. So yeah, look, some of it was good. A lot of it was quite bad.
Yeah.
frankly.
Including Wales's performance. I was home with it a
Well.
week. Anyway, let's move on. Caroline and Sara, nice to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Caroline, just run through what you're doing at Southampton in terms of sustainability.
Absolutely. So I'm the operations and sustainability manager there, but I'm actually originally the operations part of the operations team, and it's only been really in the last sort of 3 years where sustainability has evolved within my role, reflecting just the kind of really rapid momentum building around this issue. And it was really as a result of us performing quite poorly in a sustainability league table that was launched in the season 2019-2020 by Sport Positive and BBC Sport, which was for the very first time kind of looking through the lens of sustainability, particularly with environment at the core, of all Premier League clubs, how they were performing, what initiatives they had in place, what policies they had in place, how they were communicating about climate action to fans. And actually, we didn't have a sustainability strategy. We didn't have anyone responsible for it or with any accountabilities about delivering initiatives. And therefore, we came 18th in that league table. And I think that was a catalyst for us to sort of say, well, that's not right. First and foremost, it's, you know, we really should be doing better, and all clubs should be taking responsibility. And it was really useful, actually, to have that kind of naming and shaming to a certain extent, because it just enabled us to regroup, say, what do we want to do in this space? Initially, it was relatively quite unambitious. It was very much a green strategy, but on kind of reflection and engaging with kind of partners and building a network, including Basis with Russell. We actually delivered, we launched a sustainability strategy that's a lot more holistic, which incorporates our fan, social, corporate and environmental responsibilities, which is called the Halo Effect. And so my role evolved during that time as part of that working group to start embedding and delivering sustainability initiatives. My role particularly looks at environmental, which, to be fair, sits quite well alongside my operational role, because you need to start on the ground. You need to understand what your baseline is. What are you currently doing? Where are the kind of quick wins and low-hanging fruit? If I'm perfectly frank, you know, you need to start building momentum. So that for us was tackling things like single-use plastic initiatives, sort of working with fans on kind of sustainable travel initiatives, working with our partnerships teams and our supply chain and procurement on kind of our sustainable procurement policies, and, you know, basics, lights off switch, switch off your lights, stickers above lights, you know, separating out our waste a lot more clearly, branding things up to make sure people understand what we're asking of them. And then equally, and it reflects on what Russ was saying, is using our platform then to share those stories along the way, to say, we're doing this now, this is why. Because of the Halo Effect, we now are committed to this. We've signed up to the United Nations Sport for Climate Action Framework, which has a commitment to net zero, and that's in alignment with our commitments on the environmental strategy. And just building momentum, being really authentic with it, talking about the challenges we're facing, but how fans and everyone connected to the club, whether that be players, staff, but particularly fans, to be perfectly honest, because ultimately, when you think about Scope 3 emissions, which fan travel, for example, is a big part on that, we really need them to be on board. So some lovely initiatives around Green Again, which we did against Arsenal last year, which was an environmental awareness campaign for the first time, a football game where the theme of the day was environment. We had lots of activations and initiatives going on around the stadium, which have followed through to some long-term activities. So introducing a fan park and ride, for example, and partnerships with electric scooter firms. And, you know, those sorts of things have been the kind of the ongoing progress we've made in talking to supporters of the club about what the club is doing and what we'd like them to join us with.
Yeah, amazing. And Sara, that's the sort of thing we need. We need Southampton Football Club and other organisations within sport to do something, but also share those stories so the fans and everyone understands what's going on.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of reticence in a number of sectors. So I've worked in sustainability across different sectors, and people feel a bit shy about talking about what they've achieved. They kind of feel if it's not perfect, they might be critiqued, for example. So UK Sports just launched its first environmental sustainability strategy. It's all about the team of tomorrow, which is very much focusing on that kind of intergenerational aspect of sustainability. And actually, we want to carry on having those extraordinary sporting moments. So how do we support all our sports that we invest in to do that. And I think that you need to really think about that influence of sport, because it's so inspiring. It's really about kind of
Powerful, right?
it's powering positive change, both for society and the environment. So the scope and the influence you have. There was a study a while ago looking at, public attitudes and who people kind of trust. And it used to be scientists, and now it's celebrities and sports people. And people listen to what those people are saying, what those sectors are saying. So I think it is really important to get out there, to be really honest, and to be really transparent about activity and action that you're taking, but to say, because it also kind of brings that momentum together. Because, Carlin's doing some amazing stuff at Southampton, other football clubs and other sports where we can go, oh, we can borrow those ideas, we can do that, we can join. And then you get that kind of bigger swell of activity and action, and it becomes normal. Yeah. It's not like a kind of like a add-on, we're thinking about environmental sustainability. Actually, it's key to our operation and to the survival of the sports that we love.
Yeah, Russell, Caroline so eloquently talked about Southampton, but the other team that came to my mind when I knew we were doing this debate was Forest Green Rovers. They kind of led the way, haven't they, in the Football League and in the football world in terms of where their kits come from, how the pitch is created, and also the food on offer. So I suppose in many ways, would you say that the football is leading the way, or are there other sports that are doing better?
Forest Green are an anomaly because of their, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Absolutely, they are leading the way, but it's led by that one personality. Dale Vince, the chairman. This is his way of life, and he kind of said to the club, "You do it my way, or I don't come and support." So I think Forest Green absolutely are leading the way. They've got across the board all of their policies are in place. I think other clubs are, football-wise, are trying to catch up to that. Sometimes it might be a bit intimidating, thinking, well, how can we ever aspire to be quite that good? But they can. All clubs have exactly the same issues. There's a lot of good stuff going on in cricket. Obviously, it was my sport. I worked at Lords for 20 years, in fact, only 11 as sustainability manager. There's a huge amount going on in cricket across the board in terms of waste management, in terms of catering, travel, transport, etc. I think other sports is kind of isolated, where it's sort of broken down into individual clubs. Sports like snow sports, sailing. Sailing are doing huge amounts. Even globally, they're actually changing the specifications of their boats, and they've given manufacturers plenty of time. They've said, in 10 years' time, we want X% of the boat to be made from recycled materials. We want, no use of certain chemicals, etc. So at that federation level, at that high level, some of these organisations are actually starting to put these things in place and giving forewarning to say, we want you to make changes.
Right, that's interesting. So you almost like you need to be doing something now, but also doing something with a vision of 5, 10, 15 years down the line.
I think this is the issue. There's going to be, we've got the urgency. We have to do something now. So there are certain things that you can do. And look, every operational venue will have a catering contract, will have a cleaning contract, will move their players around in certain ways, will give advice to the fans on travel. Those are relatively low-cost solutions you can do now or within weeks of just planning and putting more information out, saying to your suppliers, look, sustainability is important to us. And it shouldn't be, we'll cut you off if it doesn't happen, but it can be, we want to talk about this. Because they've got other clubs, other venues, whether it's hotels, whether it's whatever, they're supplying them as well, and those questions will be coming back as well. So there are certain things that can be done relatively quickly, but if you're talking about manufacturing kit, if you're talking about specifications for sports equipment, that kind of thing, that will take a bit of time, because that's got to come in, the research and development's got to be done, you've got to look at the performance of the materials, all that kind of thing. So yes, lots of stuff you can do now, but we've got to be planning for the next few years as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But Sara, it's really hard, especially with travel, isn't it?
Travel is a tricky one. I think that's why there's paralysis in the sector, because people are like, well, athletes fly. We're kind of owning that. That's what they do. And I'm really interested in some kind of, so we talk about systems and how do you change the system? And it was mentioned this morning that you only perform to the level of the system. So actually, what are our international federations doing around their competition calendars? Are there ways to consolidate those calendars so you don't have athletes flying between continents? You can have competition in one place and then in another. How do you look at training? What training is really essential? Over COVID, and people weren't travelling for training in different climates, and actually performance was pretty good. There didn't seem to be a discernible difference. So it's really kind of interrogating that business as usual, or we've always done it this way, or actually it's because of some other commercial need, or it's like, a political issue, that's why we're doing things in particular countries at particular times. Actually, if this is important, that's what everyone is saying, the UK government's saying it, the UN internationally, we're saying, climate change is like the biggest threat of our age, then why are we not making those brave decisions and actually thinking, well, collectively, we can do some stuff here. So rather than kind of like, we can look at consolidating travel. So, for example, within my organisation, we can look at, reduction of flights, really thinking about more sustainable methods of travel. But how do you kind of reduce that need at a systems level? And sport's really interconnected. It's an international activity, right?
Yeah.
So there's massive potential at that level to tackle the issue of travel.
Yeah. What about at the football club? Caroline, if you've got a long fixture, for example, if you're going from Southampton to, say, Newcastle United, for example, would you consider flying there, or do the guys take the train?
Yeah, so, this has faced a lot of scrutiny lately. There's no lie about that. But with us, our policy is that anything north of the Midlands, we accept there's an element of flying. Sometimes it's that we fly there and get the coach back. There's just the one team coach. We used to have two. We've condensed that down to one. We're currently exploring biofuels, actually, to try and just reduce that impact further. Anything up to the Midlands is always coach. We don't tend to choose trains over some of the recent kind of disruptions and delays and unreliabilities. So hence we do prefer a coach. But yes, there are some flying. Being a South Coast club, it does present us with some challenges when there's kind of quite northern fixtures. But it's under constant review. And there's been, discussions around those kind of holding flights as well, which is when if you've chartered a plane and then it goes to your destination, then flies somewhere else and then flies back around, and it can seem really, really impactful. But that is where clubs need to do their due diligence around those flight partnerships, contracts, making sure you're understanding kind of what you're signing up to, and having those conversations, being really open about it. There is an element of we've always done it this way, but we've moved away from that, and even though there's still flights involved in our travel, it is firmly on the table as a discussion. We've had a very recent conversation about what that looks like and what the new season will look like. But it's a challenge, because I can't see us being in a situation where we would get the coach all the way to Newcastle, because there's a weighing up of performance. And I won't talk about our current performance if anyone follows football.
Steer clear of that,
So performance.
I was so tempted when you talked about where you were in the league table of sustainability.
Please don't do that to me.
I was going to say, at least you didn't finish bottom, but I thought that was unfair.
No, don't. So, we're currently third in the Sustainability League table, I'm just going to say. But no, I don't think our fans would appreciate that bit of news. But no, so the flights are still going to be part of our travel at the moment. There's consideration around recovery times and the need to perhaps get back for kind of any treatment if we've had injuries during the fixture. You've also got, like Sara was saying, the schedules. We sometimes could have a turnaround of 3 days between a fixture. If there's a midweek, perhaps a cup game after having had a weekend league game, and all of those are factors. But absolutely, it's totally irresponsible for a football club to take a 20-minute flight somewhere and things like that, and that is something that we would not be doing. But there will be, for example, a flight that is up in the north that we would probably have to take.
The other aspect of that, Russell, of course, is, I know like we're honing in here on train travel, but very difficult for a sports team, international athletes, kit and stuff, to take the train to Newcastle, for example, as well, just purely on a security level as well.
Yeah, I think so. And look, all that has to be factored in, and nobody's really saying that we shouldn't have these matches, that these matches shouldn't be taking place because of the environmental impacts. That wouldn't be supported. You need elite level sport. You need international travel. It's great to have a World Cup where the best football teams come together. It's great to have the Olympics where the best individual athletes come together for their sports. What we might question, I would suggest, is FIFA on the one hand saying they want to be a net zero organisation, but then expanding the World Cup to 48 teams instead of 36, I think it was last time, and spreading it across effectively three countries right across one continent. The amount of travel, if Qatar was the biggest, it's been said that Qatar was the biggest carbon footprint of a single event outside of a war. And that's just incredible to think of, and yet FIFA were claiming it was carbon neutral. The next one is even bigger. 48 teams will be there, and they're going to be travelling across Canada, North America, and Mexico. So we've got to look at the way that we manage these events, possibly even restructuring how we do lower level sport, maybe the way we look at recreational sport and lower leagues. How do we funnel? We still want to funnel the best athletes into elite sport, and we want the best athletes globally playing against each other, but somehow we've got to do that with reduced impacts. And just one more thing to add on to that, we've got to remember that sport isn't doing this in isolation. Travel organisations are looking at decarbonising their sector. Our energy suppliers are looking at decarbonising. So in some ways, sports impact will decrease anyway because of the efforts of other sectors, because we've got a legal requirement in this country to be net zero, whatever that means, by 2050. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day, he said he's only got two issues with that phrase, net zero by 2050. The first issue is net zero, the second issue is by 2050. All of that, those four words are still quite nebulous, we're not quite sure what's going on, but there is a drive to decarbonise these other sectors. So we're not operating in isolation, but sport has a massive opportunity to accelerate how we get to those places.
Okay, and Sara, what's your view on help and advice for organisations if they need to get to grips with sustainability and impact on the environment?
Absolutely. So there's lots out there already. At UK Sport in particular, we invest in lots of national governing bodies and in lots of different sports. So it's interesting, the conversation here has been very much around football and cricket and so on, but it's amazing if you see what climbing is up to, or shooting, for example. Like, there's all the sports are taking action in different ways. UK Sport, we've said that we would like all our sports that we invest in to have sustainability plans by 2025 and meaningful targets to reduce their carbon emissions. So we're not going to just put a target out there, we're going to support that. So we're paying for sustainability support to take all of the sports that we invest in on a journey. So we're going to put them in clusters. Great example, and we've started cluster 1, which is British triathlon and swimming, UK athletics, England hockey, and the now UK Institute of Sport have all come together to do that as a collective. So they're looking at all their environmental impacts and where they can have the most influence, where they can meaningfully make a difference. And we'd like all the sports we invest in to be at that point by 25. So we're creating this programme of support, which is a wraparound. It includes learning and development, it includes carbon literacy, it's giving people the tools to embed this within their organisations. As I said earlier, this is key to the operation and the health of your kind of sport. But also giving them the tools, the capacity, the enthusiasm. People feel empowered to do this. Like, everyone is an agent of change. Everyone in this room can do something to varying levels. You don't need to be a sustainability expert. There's a bunch of us that do that stuff, climate scientists and so on, but everyone is an expert in their own area. They all know their bit of performance, coaching, travel, operations, whatever it might be. And so kind of what we're doing at UK Sport is kind of unlocking that potential and giving people those tools, giving them that support, that momentum, and also the peer networking. Sports can learn so much from each other and are really motivated when they hear what somebody else is doing, which is why we're kind of taking sports on this journey in groups, because we feel that everyone has a part to play. It doesn't matter if you are a tiny NGB or a huge one, you can do something really meaningful, and collectively you can achieve even more.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, mind, that competitive edge amongst organisations. They're doing this, we're doing that. But I wonder, you mentioned the British triathlon and climbing. I wonder whether they should share their stories maybe a little more then to make it go a little quicker, if you like.
Absolutely, and they are doing that. So people are getting out there. I think it's, I've been working at UK Sport for a year, and even in 12 months, I've seen more conversation, people talking more confidently, people giving examples of what went well, what didn't, what they want to do better. Because there is pressure, not just from kind of the society in general, but, from fans and from athletes. Athletes are saying, what are you doing in the sport, especially the next generation coming through? They can really see, the impact on air quality or on water or on their training. And so they're saying, well, what meaningful action are you taking? So I'm definitely seeing a lot more conversation and publicity and promotion, and the broadcasters are taking it on, and it's kind of not in a preachy way as well. I quite like the way, say, for the Commonwealth Games, it's kind of slipped in. There's a lot of sustainability threads there that kind of came out in different ways, but not in a kind of an over preachy way. And I think that's really important, because it is part of life, and you want as many people to get involved as possible, not to feel like they're being guilted or anything like that. It's actually, as I said, you're empowering people. What's the positive thing you can do? We understand the kind of the challenge and the kind of maybe the slightly doom and gloom part of it, but then there's that hopeful element, and there's just so much positive that you can achieve if you do it together.
Yeah, and where do you stand on kits, Caroline? You know, shirts. At the end of the games, you know, you see the kids holding the signs up saying, "Can I have your shirt?" and that sort of stuff. You know, the fundamentals are, if we're talking about, you know, recycling, reusing, do you encourage your players not to give out their shirts and stuff like that?
Oh, that's a difficult one because fan engagement is so important, and those relationships between the athletes and a young fan who's a fan of the future.
Because these are amazing moments in their lives, aren't they?
So we haven't actually messaged about not giving shirts out for that reason. Fan engagement is super important to us. But absolutely, yeah, a big fundamental part of our environmental strategy is around waste, and reduce, reuse, recycle is huge. But for us, that looks like, you know, all of the footballs from the training ground go to the local schools. We've literally just handed a big bag of them over about 2 days ago to a local school. In fact, it was Marchwood Rangers, which is a local football team in the area of our training ground. And we just did a refurbishment at the stadium that meant that we had a lot of old benches. And in the past, the Saints of the past would have chucked everything in a skip. And we've actually donated them to a grassroots football club in the city centre, who have now got those for their changing room. You know, clubs and schools that wouldn't necessarily have funds for new equipment, you know, why wouldn't we donate those on? We've seen that as well with reuse of materials. We've donated a lot of store cupboards when we've digitised a lot of our information that we have at the stadium. We've donated all our storage cupboards to schools that are in our community champion program with Saints Foundation. So they've got those for their PE storerooms and science rooms. So, and then we tell those stories just to demonstrate that, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle is really alive. This is the epitome of that. Ultimately, we need to completely eliminate the amount of waste we create. It starts with not creating it in the first place by not buying new things if you don't need to. So that for us in real terms operationally is, you know, we've reupholstered all of our seat pads in the first team dressing room a couple of seasons ago, when in the past we'd have stripped those out because there was a couple of little tears and put all new seats in. And instead of creating that waste, we've used a local upholstering firm to reupholster. It was a significant reduction in waste. You know, there's a lower cost as well involved in that, so that helps kind of get it over the line internally. But you know, these sorts of things is just a no-brainer. So, yeah, reducing waste all the time is a focus for us.
Must be lovely for Marchwood Rangers now then to have all the gear from the Saints as well.
Yeah, definitely.
What a lovely thing to do
Those
as
local
well.
relationships is so important. You know, we do beach cleans in our local area. We just did one last week. A couple of youngsters from our Girls Academy came along and joined in that, and a bunch of participants from one of our Saints Foundation programs came along and joined it as well. And, you know, doing things within the community is massively important to us, mostly carried out within our Saints Foundation, but the opportunities for the club and Saints Foundation to work together on joint initiatives, such as our tree planting that we do in schools across the city as well, is really important.
Very impressed, very impressed. Right, we got some time for some questions before we break for lunch. Any questions? Usual format. You put your hand up, tell us who you're representing and your name, and then we'll get a microphone to you. I can see one at the back there. I think it's third row from the back. Hello.
Hi, it's Claire Donovan. I'm from the Welsh Rugby Union, but I've also got a side hustle on fresh produce and agriculture, so interesting in your points about agriculture. So I think it's brilliant, it's really good. The point about getting young people to empower their club on this topic is a phenomenal idea. But how do we avoid making the mistakes of swapping single-use plastic for waxed paper, for example, that your carbon footprint life cycle is longer and more impactful, but we think we're doing the right thing because we're not using single-use plastic, we're actually producing a product that then can't be recycled at all. So how do we build a framework as clubs start this journey to avoid them making the mistakes because they think they're doing the right thing?
Framework. Who wants to start with that one?
I'm happy to take that because I deal with cups a lot in my job. We went across to reusable cups at the stadium 3 years ago, and to begin with, it was very much a kind of, there was reusable cups, we wanted to use these now, but there was a real kind of clinging on to single-use plastic cups by our catering division, who still had these just in case we ran out. And to move away from that has taken several years. It's not as easy as just a complete behaviour change that we're doing this now. But we've now got to the point where it's a non-negotiable and there aren't any single-use plastic cups anywhere. It's reusable, that's it. and that has been backed up by making sure that we have enough cups, enough cup bins, clear branding and signage, even flags that mean that across the crowds people can see where the cup bin is. We mark the floors out so that the cup bins are in the same location every fixture, which helps obviously people that are season ticket holders perhaps who come every time to the same spot, and just making sure that we're separating those into the right system, the waste system, so they'll go through that washing and reuse process. The more cups we lose, the more risk there is of having to have a single-use item. Where we still do have single-use plastics is things like bottles with our bottles of Pepsi and things like that, and that is making sure they go through the recycling process, which will go through that complete waste management system. But overall reuse is where we're at. We've introduced water refill points in some of the concourses so people can bring reusable bottles and fill those up as well and not purchase single-use plastic bottles. But I agree with you with regards to things like coffee cups. What we see in some of our staff areas is still an inclination to be buying in something that looks on the surface, perhaps a biodegradable, a compostable, a wax-lined, looks like paper coffee cup. And I'm saying we don't have a waste stream to support this. We really need to be moving away from this. We don't have a composting facility on site. It's going to end up in our general waste. It may end up being incinerated. What we tried to do to tackle that is, again, we've purchased reusable coffee cups for every staff member, every player and everyone that works within the buildings, at the training ground of the stadium, because we actually go through over 50,000 single-use coffee cups a season, which is incredible and ridiculous. And so I often stand in the staff bistro, it doesn't make me popular, and go, where's your reusable cups? And we've got posters up reminding people, because ultimately it's all about reusables. That's more challenging in a concourse setting for fans, and so there are single-use items with regards to hot drinks, and we're working on that. But I agree with you, sometimes the items that look more sustainable because they perhaps have a paper element to them definitely aren't when it comes down to our operational waste management processes. And it's just really educating and working with really closely with our catering partners and internally with our colleagues as well to make sure that people realise we need to move away from that.
Russell, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just a quick response though, and I think the pitfall is when we focus on one particular thing. So I put a slide up earlier that said we shouldn't just focus on carbon. We also just focus on single-use plastics, and sometimes the alternatives are worse than the actual plastic, particularly if you don't have that system that Caroline just talked about, if you don't have that system in place. So it's not just going for those sort of single buzzword things that are happening at the moment, but having that holistic approach and understanding there's a life cycle that goes behind these things and there's a whole system. And that's why I would advocate you need sustainability specialists within sport to actually talk about these things and understand that whole picture.
Sara, did you want to come in on that before I get another question?
Not going to talk about plastics now.
Okay, fine. Any other questions before we break for lunch? Any other questions? No? Just Claire? Oh yeah, one at the back. Hello, I just saw your hand go up. Thank you very much.
Tim O'Connor, Bar of Ireland. Just a question. A lot of the focus seems to have been on, if I can put it this way, the carrot side of things. Encouragement, trying to get people to do the right thing and get rewarded for it. By contrast, the stick side, you mentioned Seymour. I know that Seymour has Rule 45. You can be disqualified for littering. For cycling now in terms of regular fines for littering. Should there be a focus in sports rules to enforce the stick side of the equation in terms of changing behaviour, as well as the carrot of we seem to do the right thing, there's a consequence for doing the wrong thing.
Okay. Sara, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah,
Carrot or stick
I think that's really interesting, and I think sometimes you need a combination. So personally, I think that yes, the stick approach will end up, it'll become more of a kind of a tool. So at the moment, it's very supportive, and we're giving people the chance to get to where they need to be. But actually, time is running out, and we can't spend forever trying to engage people and bring them along in a soft manner. And it will get to a point where, yes, there'll have to be regulations. So it's really interesting to see in other sectors, for example, university sector, the Higher Education Funding Council withheld money if they didn't have carbon management plans in place. And it had to meet certain criteria. And there's lots of other sectors that are kind of taking those approaches. So I think it will be interesting in the next couple of years to see that kind of the complement. So we're starting with the carrot and the supportive element. What comes next? I'm really interested to see.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to our panel. My thanks to Russell, Sara, and Carlin. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I can tell you that we're now going to break for lunch, and we shall be back at around 2:15. So enjoy your lunch, and thank you very much indeed for this morning's session. Thank you.
Long run.
The best one, kept